Good afternoon. I'm convening the 15th meeting of the Civilian Police Review Board. We have two members who are excused for today, Pastor Rich Nathan and Kyle Strickland, and we are anticipating Dr. Jones' arrival at any moment. So the first thing on the agenda would be the approval of the minutes. Can I get a motion to approve them?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hand. Approved. And I think with that, we are ready to have a presentation from the City Attorney's Office. And I want to say this publicly. I shared with someone earlier that I saw Mr. Klein and I failed to do something, and I saw him just now being interviewed. But I want to thank City Attorney Klein, but most importantly, I want to say thank you to the team that's been working with us. I know that we're not their only client, and they are incredibly busy, but you have just been so responsive to our requests. And so again, I just want to say thank you. And with that, who's in charge of the clicker or? Okay, Mr. Tobias, take it away.
So just as to start, I'll say that I learned a long time ago, I was your last prosecutor in 1996, and I learned when you ask something, you just do it, and you do it well. So that trend has continued for the last 26 years. I also will give some thanks to Mark Rutgis from our office, who created this flow chart that you see. Tiara, Jeff, and Laura and I were in a conference room at the City Attorney's Office with a dry erase board, and it did not look like this when we started. It was very convoluted, but Mark was very helpful in getting it to the format that you see here, and we'll obviously walk through that and talk about it as we go through the presentation. Basically, Chair Jackson was asking us to just focus on just kind of a reminder of roles between the board and the Department of Inspector General, and then just talk about some investigation protocols, and then also this chart, the complaint flow from initiation and as it moves through, just to provide the board with some additional clarity. And of course, if you have questions, I think it's probably appropriate, unless you say otherwise, to just interject and ask the questions kind of as we're moving through the presentation. Okay, so let's see here. I thought it would be helpful to have a little bit of background, and quite frankly, when I became counsel for the board, I didn't really understand this background, but I co-teach a class at Capital Law School in local government, and one of the presentations we did was on the Civilian Police Review Board. And Inspector General Hendricks and Board Member Younger came to the class and spoke. And in preparation for that class, I kind of learned a lot about the background, and I don't know what the knowledge base is of the board in terms of the background, so I thought a couple slides talking about some of those things would be helpful, which leads up to kind of the distinct roles of both the board and the IG. So the acronym CCSAC, the Columbus Community Safety Advisory Commission, based on what was going on in the community and, quite frankly, nationwide, this commission was formed by Mayor Ginther back in 2017 to basically review the Division of Police in a variety of areas, looking at all their operations primarily. And the ask of the commission was to recommend best practices for protecting and serving the community. And additionally, in conjunction with that commission, this matrix consulting group was hired to do a review, a comprehensive review, basically, of the police. Ultimately, what the commission did was prepared a report that had 80 recommendations in it that were made to the mayor. And I'm going to focus basically on 3 specific recommendations that were under the heading independent investigations. And that's basically where you get the first notion of a Civilian Police Review Board and a Department of Inspector General. And there's clear kind of distinguishing that there's to be 2 kind of separate entities. So you can see their recommendation number 70 was to establish an independent Civilian Review Board. And I just put some language in there so you could see what the thought process was in terms of why they believed it was necessary for a review board to be created. If I'm going too fast on the slides, let me know. I'm happy to slow them down. And then ultimately, in November of 2020, a ballot initiative was put forth to establish the CPRB and the Inspector General through the charter. And I believe it was about 70 or 75% passage rate. So it was overwhelmingly passed by the voters. And the city charter provision 215 is what establishes the Civilian Police Review Board. And it, again, this language just basically talks about how many members or odd number of members, quorum, and what the requirement should be when comprising the board. And additionally, the charter section 216, this is where you kind of get your first glimpse into kind of what the thought process was about what should the role of the board be versus what should the role of the Department of Inspector General be. And you see the language, the phrase cause investigation, which again suggests that the board may not be doing the investigation. They're going to cause the investigation to take place. And then additionally, you'll see throughout the next few slides the word recommend or recommendations, kind of more clearly delineating what the responsibility of the board should be. And then those provisions in the charter get codified in City Code 235.03, more clearly defines the board's duties. And the language that's really important is the direct the IG to investigate and prepare a report, which again is now more strongly directing that the board is not going to be conducting the investigation. The board is going to be directing the Inspector General to be investigating. And then you see again the phrase make recommendations in 4 other bullet points within City Code. The other 2 recommendations in that report were numbers 71 and 72, and this is where there's talk about this second entity, which ultimately will be the Department of the Inspector General, and that's where you see language that talks about the IG being the entity that should be doing the investigations, and that they should be administrative in nature and independent in nature. And you also see in number 72 some language that talks about specifically what types of situations are going to come under the jurisdiction of the Department of Inspector General. Any questions so far? I guess this is a good stopping point to see if anybody has any questions. Yeah.
Can you touch on the city charter, section 216, the very last sentence? The board shall make recommendations to the Division of Police regarding resolution of the complaint, and where warranted by the facts, may make recommendations pertaining to discipline.
Right, so, and again, if I say anything incorrect, anybody can chime in, but my understanding will be that when you receive a report from the Inspector General's office, that report is going to have recommendations in it related to those things, related to discipline, and related to a finding of whether the behavior that was alleged was, I'll use a variety of terms, I don't know exactly what the IG is going to use, founded, substantiated, unfounded, exonerated, unsubstantiated, that type of language. So when the board is reviewing these reports, you are deciding whether to adopt those recommendations of the IG, whether to reject them, whether to adopt them in part and reject them in part. You can adopt additional recommendations above and beyond what is in the IG's report. That's well within your authority. Does that answer your question?
I don't think that we're clear on our role of recommending discipline. Yes.
Right. So, again, my understanding would be in the IG's report, it will more clearly define what that recommended discipline should be, and then you're deciding whether to adopt that recommendation. Again, maybe Tier and Jeff might be able to speak. I don't know what I know it's progressive discipline, but I don't know what the stages of discipline are within the FOP CBA and how that works on that side. But again, my understanding would be that the IG would recommend specifics in terms of discipline, and then you would vote whether to adopt those recommendations, and then that would be forwarded to either the chief of police or the director of public safety, and then they decide whether to follow those recommendations.
I think the
I wanna, yeah.
real quickly, one thing I wanted to add, it could be, if you read the way it's worded, it could be that the facts don't merit discipline, so you
Yes.
wouldn't be recommending it, so.
Right.
There's that too.
Yes.
I believe it is that word. Discipline is sort of, it's a little misleading as to what the recommendations, since the recommendations of the IG are only going to be based on actual policies. For example, this person shouldn't have put his hands on that other person and violated this policy. Those don't merit discipline. This is the policy. We're asking you to change that policy or to, adopt, more training, et cetera, et cetera. So there is no, I'm sorry, is to use the word discipline, to me implies that, to the public, that we do have that power to be able to say this person should be terminated because now this is the third offense where they have violated this. And to the public's like, to their point, why would we be listening to someone breaking a policy 3 times and there not be a disciplinary action involved? And
Right, well, a few things, and
please.
one, Article 10 of the collective bargaining agreement regulates discipline.
Right.
So we have to be compliant with Article 10 of the collective bargaining agreement.
Of the FOP.
Well, it's the agreement between the FOP and the city. Okay, so it's the contract between the city and the FOP. The city agreed to that contract, so we have to comply with the terms of it. And it does regulate the manner in which officers are disciplined. And there's a lot to it, but it's basically progressive discipline. And one of the things with the contract, one of the difficulties for you with the contract is we have the contract, but we also have a long history relative to the contract through arbitrations and grievances. So sometimes the plain language is not as easy to understand as it would seem. But what you see in the contract is the philosophy is progressive discipline. So we have to be compliant with that.
Okay, so, I'm just chiming in, and I was a few minutes late, so my apologies for that. But I think, like Gambit was saying, the use of the term, discipline, because what we were under the impression of is that the, IG is going to make a report from her office that may have some recommendations. Now, those recommendations might pertain to policy or things like that, but she specifically won't be addressing the manner in which somebody is disciplined. And I think that's what's confusing some people here. So that's why if y'all can provide some clarity on that.
That is correct. That's the correct interpretation of what the IG has decided to do. She will be recommending that an officer be disciplined, but she would not be giving specific recommendations about how that officer is going to be disciplined.
So let me just chime in for a moment. I have before me recommendations coming from the IG. So let me just maybe share the language on this particular one. Also, it is recommended that the investigation report be forwarded to the City of Columbus, Director of Public Safety, or Columbus Division of Police, Chief of Police, for review and the consideration of disciplinary action in accordance with CPD policies and procedures and the collective bargaining agreement between the City of Columbus and the Fraternal Order of Police. That's the recommendation.
Correct. That's a recommendation.
It's, yes.
Yes.
Yes. And so our role will be, do we accept this? If we don't accept it, I mean, we have other options, but that's how it's going to read. So does that help? Yes, sir.
So, I was gonna ask Mr. Furby this, so the IG can say, we recommend discipline occur in accordance with this. But then who is because the recommendations are made to the Public Safety Department and the Chief of
It's
Police.
an and/or.
Okay.
And we get to choose that.
Okay.
We either send it to the police chief or we send it to the Director of Public Safety.
Okay, and then are either of those entities who gets to then determine the specific type of discipline that is done?
That will be done pursuant to the collective bargaining agreement. So depending on the nature of discipline, it will be decided by one of those people.
Right.
Are we clear? Okay.
Does that make sense? And I know that the way, if you've read the collective bargaining agreement, it is, like a lot of these, it's not perfectly clear always.
Well, I've been a labor leader for 35
So, you
years.
know.
There's no black and white collective bargaining agreement.
Right.
You know, the only issue I have is simply this. So say, for instance, the IG comes in and her office makes a recommendation that we do such and so and so pursuant to, you know, the collective bargaining agreement, all that kind of stuff. Okay, and we say, yes, we are in agreement with that. Therefore, it goes to whoever the next entity is in line, public safety director or police chief. And the discipline that they render, this board does not feel that it's enough. Is there a recourse, number one? And number two, how does that reflect on this board in the eyes of the public? Because when you think about what they are looking for, and I keep hearing people buzzing in my ear, and you know, and they really don't. I think many of them really don't have a good understanding as to how this board operates, because they think that we are in some ways their protector, their buffer.
The only thing that I can say, Reverend, is that this is what the law is, and we can't change the law. I mean, at some point, if there's and I don't even know if we could do this, if it would be a charter change, but again, it still has to be in accordance with the collective bargaining agreement. I'm not so sure how we could go, but right now, this is the way it is.
I think the theory is that, you know, there's additional scrutiny, thank you, there's additional scrutiny now and more eyes on it. And so the likelihood of a more appropriate outcome versus what's been happening previously, there's an increased likelihood of those types of outcomes because of the additional scrutiny that's on it.
Thing, my point is we have to write it so everybody understands it, right? So if we're confused, certainly the public will be confused. So when we say it, either here or at those commission meetings, those community commission meetings, we have to be able to say it so that they understand it. They're not going to get this if we're having these many questions. So when we say discipline, let's explain what we mean exactly to the T. Otherwise, they're going to think exactly, because that's what they're asking me. I mean, my family, my friends say, what can you guys do? And when I explain it, to be honest, they say, oh, so nothing? Really?
Yeah, and I don't do philosophy, I do law. And the bottom line is, you guys make recommendations to the Division of Police and the Department of Public Safety. I would like to think they'll follow them, but they don't have to.
All I'm saying is be clear.
Yeah, it's recommendations. Well, I don't know. I mean, like I said, I don't do philosophy. I think there's a lot of power in that recommendation. I think the community will see that. But it is a recommendation.
And I think that Mac brings up a valid point, and I think that this board just needs to make sure that we have a good understanding on the difference between recommendation and how discipline comes into play, because we need to understand that the discipline that may come into play based upon our recommendation has to be in accordance with, you know, such and such and so and so.
Right. I mean, we are constrained by the collective bargaining agreement, no doubt. We agreed to that as a city.
And if I understand correctly, we can recommend discipline, but not what the discipline is to be, right? So we find that there warrants discipline, make that recommendation, but we can't say we recommend this person be written up, suspended, or terminated.
Correct.
Right. At that point, then the city would then mete out the appropriate discipline based on the principles of progressive discipline. Unless it was critical misconduct or insubordination, then they could deviate from progressive.
We as a board have ever been shown it, but could we see the tiers? Yeah, like what all the discipline.
Sure. It does, if you look at Article 10, or Section 10.3 and Article 10 in the contract, it does generally lay out the tiers of discipline and how progressive discipline works. Yeah, you guys have the contract?
Section where?
Sure.
I don't have it in.
Didn't we, when we first got started, didn't we have a whole, I won't say the entire meeting on the contract and actually
Well,
had it? So
yeah.
if you go back to your, not that we can't do it again, and you can probably tell that I am a paper person, so I'm responsible for your having this in front of you today in terms of paper, because I think it's easier to go back and remind yourself or to look at. But quite frankly, this conversation that we're having right now, and I'm sure there'll be others, is why I wanted the city attorney's office to go back and lay this out for us again before we actually start reviewing the recommendations from the IG. Okay?
Any other questions right now? Okay, so going back to the slides, I was on the recommendations 71 and 72, which are talking about the creation of the Department of Inspector General, and again, is using language to show that the IG's office is the entity that should be conducting these investigations. And as I talked about earlier, the vote in November 2020 created these city charter provisions. Section 217 talks about the Department of Inspector General, and again, there's language in there indicating one or more investigators, showing that that department is going to be tasked with conducting the investigations. And I underline that last sentence because that's important, that the IG serves under the guidance of you. And now my battery's not working. Maybe it's just the network. Was that the next slide? All right, thanks. I'm going to have to go to next slide, please, instead of pushing the right forward button. And then the codification of those city charter provisions, experience, and duty. So again, this very clearly says that IG shall have professional experience in the investigation of allegations of misconduct, showing that that department is the department that is going to be tasked with doing the investigations. I'm going to try it one more time. Oh, you're going to just keep down? All right. So every time I look up at you, just advance the slide. How about that? Okay, so independent and distinct roles of both the board and the IG. So based on those charter provisions, based on the statutory provisions, the board can do basically all of the following. And it's things that have been talked about over the course of many meetings, you know, initiate a complaint. That's what happened, I think, 2 meetings ago in relation to some recent events here in Columbus. If a citizen were to come to you, you would direct them to the IG. You would then be reviewing complaints, reports, recommendations that the IG provides to you. Based on your voting, you would forward recommendations to either the Director of Public Safety and or the Chief of Police. You have the right to conduct hearings. That's on the next slide. And then you could refer a report back to the IG for further investigation. Yes?
I'm a little unclear about something about the initiation of complaints and that elapse in 90-day period as far as filing the complaints. Now, the board initiated a complaint, I believe it was, I'm not sure it was the last meeting or, because we wanted to make sure that the 90-day period didn't elapse because that particular issue was with the, with London, BCI at this particular time. Now, I've been reading the newspaper and listening to the radio, and there are many incidences that occur with Columbus Police, and I printed some out. And one had to do with an emergency room situation where BCI completed its investigation. There was a no bill. It was sent to the prosecutor's office. There was a no bill, and nothing, at this point, everything's stopped because I'm sure that this occurred, that the time has elapsed, that 90-day period, so nothing can be done with this. Right. But isn't it the responsibility of the board and the IG, and I'm not sure here, I don't know what the answer is, isn't it our responsibility to review these all incidences to make sure that, and to see, to review them, and some may be sustained, some may be not sustained, and what is the mechanism? Sure. Because we can't have, and should the mechanism be with the board or with the IG? Because we can't just haphazardly be looking at the newspaper or listening to the radio. So what do we do here?
Right, so, we're always trying, my colleagues and I, if you guys disagree, let me know, but that's more of a policy consideration for the board as opposed to a legal consideration. How you feel about it. The initial, I think, thought process was that this would be complaint-driven by the public. And if somebody in the public was involved in a situation, they would be coming forward. But as we know, there may be situations where they're still grieving, or they're fearful, or they're curious, or they're confused, and you don't want that 90-day period to lapse, and the board has a real concern about that. That's an issue for the board to discuss and decide from a policy-making standpoint how it wants to address that type of scenario.
Okay.
Agreed.
I think in our last meeting, we had a discussion about this. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the things that we talked about when we had the IG sitting in front of us was that she had the ability, if there was a police involved incident, that she thought merited her to open up an investigation. And then, if I'm right, and then pause it, just in case, because we don't want to let that 90-day period go by until we see what BCI, their conclusion is, that she has the power to do that. That's what I understood. Now, maybe I'm wrong.
I think the IG, and jump in, the IG can only investigate a citizen complaint or when directed by the CRB.
Okay.
So, right. You could jump in and direct, yes.
The charter provides you all with the authority to initiate a complaint. But you have delegated said powers, and you've retained them as well, I think, said powers to the IG in the event the IG does want to unilaterally initiate a complaint. But pursuant to the charter, you all were endowed with those powers. You have delegated those powers to the IG, but you've also retained the power to initiate. You did not retain power to investigate. You never had power to investigate. You had power to cause for the investigation of. But that initiation piece does belong now to both the board and the Inspector General.
It's in your policies and procedures document, I believe.
Because we talked about that at length at our last meeting.
I think what you're asking, though, is how do you not miss stuff?
Right.
How do you preserve the ability to do so by stopping the clock?
Yeah, there was an incident today, this morning at TJ.
Right, there was.
And I thought, well, what do I do here? I mean, I think we need something, since we have concurrent, the IG or the board, somebody has to take responsibility so that we look at these things and then make a decision whether it should be sustained or not sustained, but we can't just miss them.
I think operationally, you'll figure out a way to stay on top of those incidents. I know right now, I kind of keep the IG abreast of incidents that I'm aware of because we receive information almost right away about officer-involved incidents. And so I will pass those on, just say, hey, heads up, this came in. So I think you all thinking about what your process and procedures or policies and procedures are going to be with regard to keeping an eye out and flagging incidents that you think should be investigated administratively.
So just for a point of clarity, do you all receive notice of every single use of force incident with CDP? No. Does anyone?
Not necessarily. I mean, yes, I guess. People in the chain of command do. I certainly do not.
Yeah.
I mean, an officer could use mace this morning, and I wouldn't know about that. And I don't know how much of that you want to know or look at.
Right.
I mean, the vast majority of CPD uses of force do not result in a citizen complaint.
True. Maybe let me amend and say when a firearm is used, do you receive that?
Yes,
Okay,
we
and
know
then-
of that, correct.
And potentially with loss of life, you receive those as well.
When you say use, let me ask you a question, because I mean, there's a lot to what you're saying. CPD is a big agency and a lot happens. I mean, CPD in the last year, and this number I may be wrong, so don't quote me, but they probably had 3,000 to 4,000 displays of firearms.
I mean
Okay.
discharge.
Discharge, okay? When it hits somebody,
Right.
I mean, we have accidental discharges, there's multiple layers to this.
I think here's what I'm trying to get at what I think our interest is, which is not missing something.
Yeah.
I'm hoping to be able to propose an action of some sort, so that there is a notice circle that takes place. But what I don't know is who houses that information to be able to point, like, what kind of motion would I be making unless I know
The
who
Division
gets
of
the
Police has that
info?
information. It just depends how you want to set the criteria, I guess is what I'm getting at. It could be whatever's referred to BCI. You know, I don't know if that's the criteria you
Gotcha.
want, but CPD has that information all in some form somewhere. It just depends where you want to set the boundaries for what you want.
Thank you.
And then the other consideration would be if you then want to act on that, it would require a meeting and a motion and a second and a vote.
And I would just caution, I'm not trying to talk out of anything, but the Division of Police, like I said, has a lot of uses of force, the vast majority of which the citizen does not complain about in any manner. And I would say most of the time they don't complain because they don't think it unjustified. So I guess it depends all what you want out of that.
Yep, I think during one of our meetings, we talked about specifically in instances of loss of life, or,
Serious physical harm.
yes, in those
That's the
instances that
criteria
were.
for BCI investigations, you know, in custody death, you know, use of deadly force resulting in, you know, stopping tactic that causes serious physical harm. That's the criteria for what we send to BCI.
Gotcha, okay, thank you.
All right, next slide, please. So I mentioned the next slide would be about hearings. So I think there was some discussion at the last meeting in October about the hearings and what the purpose of the hearings were, and wouldn't the hearings constitute some form of investigation? And so I'm hoping these bullet points kind of provide some additional information about the purpose of the hearings. You would vote to have a hearing on any particular report that you've reviewed to flush out and better understand the information in the report. There is some ability to ask witnesses to appear and all the other things that are in the second bullet point. And based on those hearings, if you believe that further investigation is necessary, you can then direct the IG to reopen the complaint for some specific purpose to do additional investigation. And then a vote, obviously, is necessary to schedule a hearing.
Let me interject here. Attorney Ross reached out to me before the meeting started, and the topic was the hearings. And, you know, and I would say we need some guidance. And so at our next meeting, one of the agenda items will be the hearing, the hearing.
Next slide, please. So one of the previous slides talked about what the board can do. This provides some information about what the Department of Inspector General can do, and accept the complaints from the board or citizens, investigate, provide the reports back to you with recommendations. And as we mentioned, the recommendations can be related to those three items, and then do some follow-up investigations based on your orders. I'm going to try this one more time. No? USB needs to be charged. All right, so I think this is where Tierra is going to cover some things regarding the investigations on the side of the DIG.
All right. So, as we have much discussed, how investigations are conducted and also the timeline for which investigations need to be completed, they are both governed by the collective bargaining agreement, and it's Article 8 of the collective bargaining agreement that kind of gives us the guideposts for how investigations should be conducted, as well as the timeline in which investigations should be completed. The collective bargaining agreement is negotiated every 3 years, so negotiation is coming up in 2023 for a new collective bargaining agreement. And so I think some of these conversations that you're having about the ability to do certain things, right, that will be the topic of negotiation when the city comes back to the table to negotiate a contract. But right now you are kind of stuck with what you have, and that is Article 8 of the FOP. So details, procedures by which investigations must be conducted by not only the Department of Inspector General, but also by the chain of command, by the Equal Employment Opportunity Office, and obviously you all's role in that is going to be governed by the contract as well. If any of the procedures set forth in Article 8 are not followed, they can be grieved by the FOP, which means that certain findings of the investigations by the Department of Inspector General and the recommendations could be in jeopardy should some of those rules not be followed according to Article 8, okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Think I'm ready? All right, 8.12 is a really important section of the article, particularly because, one, it outlines what complaints the IG can investigate. These are citizen complaints. Citizen complaints are defined in the contract. Citizen not necessarily defined in the charter, but absolutely defined in the contract. And citizen complaints are defined as individuals who are not sworn employees of the Division of Police, and this is the Columbus Division of Police, or any anonymous complaint. And so obviously if an anonymous complaint comes in, you're not gonna know who it's coming from, and so that will be dictated, or that will be a citizen complaint until you know one way or the other who has filed the complaint with the department's office. You will have employees of the Columbus Division of Police who are not sworn. So there is a difference between an employee of the Columbus Division of Police and a sworn member of the Columbus Division of Police. A non-sworn employee is going to be considered a citizen for purposes of citizen complaints. However, there is an equal employment opportunity office that will likely look into a lot of those employee against employee types of complaints. But just so you understand, as employees of the Columbus Division of Police who are not sworn could be considered citizens under this definition. So in order for a citizen complaint to be investigated, it must be received in writing or reduced to writing within 90 days of the alleged incident. And so what that means, and I said received, I mean received by the city. We've all talked together in trying to define what the city means because there are a bunch of different departments in the city. And as we become more transparent, as this board becomes more transparent, citizens are going to lodge complaints everywhere. And so it's important to be clear about what we're going to consider, who we're going to consider as the city in regards to a citizen complaint. So the Department of Inspector General is the city. The Columbus Police Review Board is the city. The EEO office is the city. The Internal Affairs Bureau is going to be the city. The Department of Public Safety is going to be the city for purposes of citizen complaints to be received. They have to be received within 90 days in writing or reduced to writing, unless they fall within 4 exceptions that are delineated in the contract in Article 8. The 2 big ones, I think, for your consideration are if the alleged complaint is criminal on its face, or if it can reasonably be deemed criminal based on a review from our office, from the city attorney's office. In those instances, that 90-day timeline extends to the statute of limitations for the particular crime that is alleged. For example, if you get a citizen complaint, and on the face of the complaint, you say criminal assault. All right, if it's assault, misdemeanor assault, statute of limitations is pretty much 2 years on that. So it changes from 90 days to 2 years. So if the incident happened 2 years ago and it's criminal assault, then you can still investigate that complaint even though technically it happened more than 90 days ago.
So if an individual CPD officer witnesses an incident which is not criminal by nature, but it's something that he thinks should be reported, the citizen does not want to report, he or she believes that it should be reported, what recourse that specific officer have at this? He or she would have no recourse through through the IG and the Civilian Review Board. Is that correct?
And you're saying that because he is not a citizen under
He
the
is not-
definition of citizen complaint. He is a sworn officer.
Correct.
That is reporting misconduct of another sworn officer.
Correct.
That is going to go to IAB. So he does have recourse. It would not be through the Civilian Police Review Board. It would be through the IAB or potentially the EEO office.
All right. I guess I was wrong. I thought pretty much IAB was going to be non-existent, but they are they're still there.
They still exist.
Sorry, they're still there, they're still there?
They're still there.
Okay, I'm glad it got clarified, so that would be his.
There is recourse, yes. It's
There
just not
is
through this
recourse.
process
Right.
Okay,
necessarily.
got it.
The flow
Okay.
chart actually-
Sorry about that.
The flow chart actually has sworn officers reporting to.
So
I
we
will-
will talk about the flow chart because we want to give you everything that could happen.
Okay.
But everything that can happen is not necessarily everything that should happen. And it's not necessarily what the policies and procedures are going to be moving forward.
Okay,
So that flow chart will explain kind of the differences. Our job is to tell you legally what your floor is. And then once you know what your floor is, you can create policies and procedures within that. That may look different as long as it's not violating the law.
one little
Or the
question.
contract.
One little question. Other than that, what will Internal Affairs be doing at this particular time? Ferb?
They're going to have a fairly limited function as we move forward, because you think about it, the vast majority of officer-on-officer complaints are EEO in nature, and they're going to go to the EEO officer for investigation. So I think that's a work in progress, but as this process moves forward, I think IA will have a fairly limited function.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions before I move on? Okay, received in 90 days in writing or reduced to writing, that allows for the DIG to investigate the complaint. And again, the board was given by the charter powers to receive complaints. You've given those powers over to the Department of Inspector General so she can receive complaints. And it'll go through an intake process where they'll determine whether or not they can move forward with the investigation based on the terms of the contract.
And real quickly on the 90 days, the 90 days is a hard 90 days. If that complaint is not criminal in nature and it's made on the 91st day, it is not getting investigated.
Yeah.
And it has to be received in writing or reduced to writing within 90 days. So if it's not criminal, it's dead on arrival on the 91st day.
Right. That make sense? Okay. The only other caveat that I want to bring to your attention, obviously, folks are able to file anonymous complaints. Any anonymous complaint isn't necessarily going to be investigated. There has to be an ability to corroborate the evidence in that anonymous complaint in order for the Department of Inspector General to investigate that complaint. It either has to be within the information that is filed in the complaint or reasonably obtained from the information that is filed in the complaint. So anonymous complaints can be investigated as long as there is corroborative evidence that can reasonably be obtained from the information that is provided. Does that make sense? Questions? All right. I think we talked about this already, exceptions to that 90-day rule. Like Furby said, just to make it simple, if it's not criminal, then you're going to have to receive it in writing or have it reduced to writing within 90 days of the alleged incident. Go to the next slide. All right. So that's your first timeline. 90 days to receive the complaint in writing or reduce it to writing. Reverend Tatum, I knew you had a question. That's why I kept asking. I could tell by your
I
face.
just want to bring clarity to what those two phrases that you keep using when you say writing or reduced to writing.
Sure.
Let's have some clarity on what that means
Sure.
when you say reduced to writing. What does that mean?
So,
No, go ahead, Terry. Go ahead. You're going to say the same thing, I'm sure. Go ahead.
all right. So you obviously know in writing. You receive it in writing. You receive it through the mail. It's in writing. You receive an email. We're going to consider that to be in writing. But the IG's office has a hotline whereby there may be voicemails left.
Okay.
And that's a complaint. So the IG is going to have the responsibility of making sure she's checking her voicemails and reducing
and
those
putting
complaints
that in writing.
to writing
Okay.
before that 90-day
I just wanted to
timeline
make
is
sure
up.
we had clarity.
Yes, sir.
So
No, that's a good
we've thought
question.
about all of this, and these have been issues. I mean, prior to the IG existing, these kind of things were issues within the division of police too. So, I mean, these are issues. So if she gets a voicemail on a Friday evening on the 89th day, and it doesn't get reduced to writing till Monday, it's late.
Yeah. And the reason why I say this is because as a pastor, as a preacher with peers, I get all these questions.
Sure,
Sure.
absolutely.
And what I can talk to them about and be able to explain to them, because many of them do not tune in to these meetings, I want to be able to explain it to them with clarity and truth. okay? So that's why I ask these questions.
Absolutely.
absolutely.
Ask away.
And the message should be, if you believe an officer has acted inappropriately or engaged in misconduct, make the complaint immediately, but it has to be made within 90 days.
Okay,
All right?
I'm good.
Okay. So that's your first timeline that you have to consider. The second timeline that you need to consider is how long the Inspector General has to actually complete the investigation. Real easy at that. The contract likes 90. 90 days to also complete the investigation. And there are certain triggers that will toll that time and allow additional time. So, in the event that it is a ongoing criminal investigation or the Department of Inspector General has referred it to the chain of command to make a determination about criminality, that's going to toll that 90 days. Now, it doesn't start over, but if you have the complaint for 3 days, you don't know whether it's criminal, or at the third day you decide this is criminal and we need to launch a criminal investigation, then it tolls the time at 3 days. Once the criminal investigation is concluded, sent back to the Department of Inspector General, Inspector General has 87 remaining days to complete the investigation. Does that make sense? A criminal investigation is going to be deemed concluded. We talked about it a little bit prior. Once the prosecuting entity or agency has determined a no bill. What that means is they've looked at all of the evidence and they've said, we are not going to move forward with an indictment. That's a no bill. At that point, the criminal investigation will be deemed concluded. Or if the prosecutor says we are going to move forward with the trial, and this is where the frustrating piece to you all is going to occur, that investigation is not over till the trial is over. What that means is you could be seeing complaints for misconduct years after the alleged incident happens if a prosecutor decides they're going to move forward with a criminal investigation and a trial.
Is there already a notification process set up for when a no bill is obtained?
Sure.
And how quickly the IG is notified about that?
So the IG has had the opportunity to meet with several entities, including BCI, which is going to be a good majority of where your criminal investigations are going to occur. One great thing about BCI is they're very transparent about no bills. They put them up on their website as soon as they occur. But she has already fleshed out a process by which she will be notified as soon as a criminal investigation is over. Whether or not the prosecutor decides to move forward, that's going to be a process she has to flesh out with the prosecutor. So if the prosecutor says, no bill, we are hoping that there is a notification loop that includes the Department of Inspector General, where she is included at the same time BCI is notified about a no bill
And
or about an indictment.
I think I shared this at the last meeting, just briefly. I had a conversation, and I'm not sure of titles. I would still refer to her as Judge Janet Grubb. She was one of my peers, but she is leading the criminal division of the Franklin County Prosecutor's Office. And she shared with me, this was a conversation probably 6 weeks ago, that at that time, just for the charge of murder, that they have pending something like 240 cases, and the cases that are currently being tried are from 2018 and 2019. I think she also indicated to me, there was another number she gave me that was even larger, because it involved everything beyond, murder. So that's just to point out again, in terms of conclusion of the
Right.
criminal matter, it could be years. I would remind you that the two incidents, the two murders, I guess I have to say alleged murders at this point, that occurred in December of 2020?
20. You talking about
20?
Andre Hill?
Yes, in 20. Neither of those cases have actually been tried.
Right.
I think one of them is currently on Judge McIntosh's docket. I don't know about the second one. So again, just
Yeah,
in terms of how long this takes.
The Andre Hill case, in fact, was continued
Continued.
again.
Was
So-
that Judge McIntosh?
Yeah, and that's next winter. So a couple years for these cases to get to trial sometimes. So it's a long time period.
Yeah.
So in the event that the Department of Inspector General needs an extension, the contract does allow for an extension to be requested. It has to be requested in writing to the Fraternal Order of Police. The contract does say that extension should not be unreasonably withheld. The general rule, I know that the IG is on board, is that she get these investigations done well before that 90-day timeline. And it's going to be important for you all, I'll talk about it in a minute, because you have a third kind of timeline that you need to consider. So 90 days to receive the complaint, and these are general rules, obviously there's exceptions. 90 days to investigate the complaint, but for an extension provided by the FOP or a criminal investigation is ongoing. And then your next timeline is there's this 180-day umbrella that any arbitrator is going to consider when determining whether whether an officer should be disciplined for a certain act of misconduct. And so what that means is if the full investigation, and that includes you all, has not been completed within 180 days from the alleged incident, there may not be an ability to discipline, even though there could be a finding of misconduct. So I'm just going to give you an example, and I'm going to try to use easy numbers because I'm not good at math. That's why I'm a lawyer. An alleged incident happens. In 10 days, the Department of Inspector General gets the complaint. She completes her investigation in 80 days, and she forwards that to the board for review. We're at 90 days, right? We're at 90 days. When she initially forwards it to the board for review, technically her investigation time period, that 90 days tolls. So while you're reviewing it, we're still at 80 days for her to complete the investigation. But we're still under that 180-day time frame from the time that the alleged incident happened until the conclusion of the matter. So if the board takes 20 days to review that investigation, we're at, what did I say, 10 plus 80, that's 90, plus 20, that's at 110 days. And you want to send that investigation back to the Inspector General because you don't think it was thorough enough or you have some more questions or whatever, you got to still consider that 180 days. And so I would be mindful of how long it takes for the review, and that's why I brought this up to the chair. Having policies and procedures in place about your hearings and what that's going to look like and how long those are going to take are going to be dictated by that 180-day full timeline for discipline. Because in the event you're going to sustain a finding that the IG makes and you're going to want discipline, the arbitrator is going to consider how long it took from the time the incident occurred under that 180-day guideline.
Bargaining agreement?
Yes.
Okay.
It used to be in past contracts an immediate bar. If it took 181 days, no discipline. Now the contract has given a little bit of leeway and just says the arbitrator is going to consider that 180 days in determining whether or not there will be discipline. But the spirit of that 180 days, we believe, is still very much there. And really, you're only going to get leeway for maybe a 1 or 2 day mishap for unintentional mistakes, something small.
Is that also inclusive of however long it sits on the desk of either the Director of Public Safety or the Chief of Police? No. Okay.
Good question, because I had that
I mean,
question too.
The referral back's the hard one. So if you get it from the IG after 80 days of investigation, and you want to refer it back for further investigation, you should consider them having 10 days to do that, essentially.
Right.
Is there a chain of evidence or whatever you might want to call, like say for instance, if we send that back close to that 180-day period, does somebody have to sign off that they have received that with, at a certain date and time, so that if it does sit on somebody's desk, so that, does that mean we get penalized because an individual?
That is a good question. I think that the contract doesn't say you have to have somebody to sign to say they received it. It's important that in your operations and in your policy, you make sure that whenever that investigation is sent back to the IG, it's time-stamped, so you know exactly what day it's sent back. The IG will also, I think, include in her reports, you'll know how long it took her to complete an investigation. You'll know, from the date in which the city received the complaint. You'll have all of those available to you, so that should always be a part of your discussion, particularly if you're going to send it back to the IG to do more investigation.
Your timeline should be crystal clear, yes. You should be crystal clear so you could defend those. If this ends up in an arbitration down the road, you're going to want your timelines crystal clear. For example, the IG, we've talked about this relative to the IG. If she refers something to the chain of command because she thinks it's criminal, that will hold the time when it gets to the chain of command, which we've identified as the chief for that purpose. So once that email is sent to the chief, that tolls the time.
Okay.
So you're going to have clear demarcations of times, because 1 day, 2 days can make a difference in there. Like Tiara said, the 180 days, there is some more leeway in it now than there used to be. However, I wouldn't bet on that. We should be in those timelines.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
So the 180th day is the day that the complaint leaves the board? Is that when is that 180th day?
It should be. So my hope is that you're going to be sending it day 100, day 90,
Sure,
right? It's not
but-
going to take that 180 days. But yes, that is going to be the timeline that is looked at. On day 180, if it's sent from the board to the director of public safety or to the chief of police, you're good to go.
Okay. Is it when they receive it? I mean, I don't want to be a stickler, but we might have something that, is it when it's received by them?
I would argue when it's submitted by you
To them? Okay. Should we have some sort of we should probably have some sort of a mechanism that, yeah, okay.
So the IG is
the IG
using
is gonna be
Matrix. The
able
good
to-
thing about Matrix, everything is time-stamped. It's very helpful. We're kind
Okay.
of going through Matrix to clear up some of that. So you will definitely have clear, consistent timelines, at least from the time the complaint is received until the time the IG finishes her investigation.
Okay.
Now, the board, you all can figure out policies to make sure that you've got all of your ducks in a row and timestamps for the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, I think we have the option of doing both paper or electronically, but once it's entered into Matrix, when she reports to whoever she's reporting it to, that's all timestamp. It's all electronic, so there's no, I don't know, not getting the report on time kind of thing.
Any other questions about timelines?
Right, and if you read the language real quickly, it says an investigation will be considered concluded on the date it is initially forwarded to the chain of command and/or the CRB for review. So just have those dates very clear. Those can be subjects of grievances.
Timelines are extremely important, and if you do not follow them, all of your hard work will go out the door just because I'm missing a timeline.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have any questions about timeline, but I'm curious if we've all sort of considered as board members, and also if the chair has considered the fact that, according to some of these, timelines for, anything that is currently happening right now, we will not be sitting on this board when this may come back later. So we may see it at intake, object to maybe whatever, actually, we wouldn't even be touching it, right? At that point, boom, it stops, and then boom, once the criminal investigation is done, then we can pick it up at that point. So, yeah, it's, does the whole 2-year, 3-year, time that we all sit on this board, does that still sort of make sense?
I don't think we have the power to change that.
No, we don't? Okay. I thought that was one of the things that we voted on at the very beginning, that we were talking about how long we would sit on it, 2 or 3?
No,
Or is that
I got
already
you
in the
there.
charter?
Yeah, but as far as the timeline, yeah, if it's a criminal investigation,
Yeah, not that, but how long we sit on the, I think that, I don't know, it just sort of makes,
I got you.
yeah.
I'm sorry, is your question, let me try to clear on your question. In terms of how long the IG has completed investigation, it's in our hands. Is that the time period you're talking about? Before we make a decision?
I'm talking about the time period that we all sit on this board, so like we may see a case like come up, in the news today and stuff, but it goes to criminal, and we may see it at intake, but then this actual board never actually will get to really look at that investigation, right? Review that investigation. It will be a different board. Just considering the 2 or 3 year timeline that we all sit on here, does that still make sense now that we know this information about?
Well, in terms of our terms, and it's a little different for this first board. A term is 3 years, and you can serve 2 terms. Except for this first board, there are some of us who are only serving 2-year terms. And we did that so that everyone
Wouldn't be.
would be
accident-
going off, exiting at the same time.
Right.
But it's typically not a 1 or 2 year thing. It's at least a 3-year term, unless, of course, someone resigns and then there's an appointment, et cetera.
Right.
So Gambit, the worst case scenario is you're on the board for 6 years and it's still open.
Right.
That could happen.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, exceedingly unlikely.
I'd also indicate it's a statutory provision, so it would have to be changed by city council. It does say you can serve more than 1 term, but may not serve more than 2 terms consecutively. So you could be on for 6, off for 3, and then potentially come back on for another 2 terms.
But also, let me make sure I have this clear too. You divided us up into 3 groups.
And I will be making assignments today. That's what I'm literally sitting here working on, including the package that you just gave me today, right? Because I am a little concerned, and I'll just tell you, I didn't do this beforehand because I felt we needed to be, I'll use the term grounded. Again, the NACOL presentation, what you're doing today, that we weren't really ready to take on the role of reviewing and making decisions. So, but as of today, and then I'll go on and share with you that at our next meeting, I will expect all 3 reviewing committees to come back and report to the full board. And it's looking right now as if you will each have 10 matters. They're not necessarily very long or very thick. I mean, maybe up to 5 pages. But, so you really should today, and I will be appointing chairs of each reviewing committee. You want to discuss a meeting, I mean, not in here, but at the end. If you can get your meeting for you to review, I think that would be excellent. Don't wait.
Yeah, and to touch on that, I think we're going to cover some of that, because I think we discussed it in our meeting that we had the other day. But also, I was speaking to Gambit's question about you perhaps starting the case and then being off. You might cycle off of the board, but there will be other members of your group that would still be a part of the board to carry it through, since we have the group structure.
Good point.
Yeah, that is a good point. Thanks.
Okay. If there are no further questions, we can go to the next slide. All right. So we talked a little bit about this, and I think this has been a hot topic. What can the Department of Inspector General do while there is an ongoing criminal investigation? So I'm going to start with telling you what the contract says she could do, and then I'm going to tell you what I've advised her to do pursuant to some constitutional ramifications. So Article 8 says she has the discretion, number 1, to conduct non-criminal investigations. She cannot conduct criminal investigations. Is that clear? Okay. Second thing, it says that she may observe a criminal investigation. So maybe that means an inspector, one of the inspectors can go out and sit while someone is being questioned during a criminal investigation. She can. That's what the contract says. She can do that. And then it says when she conducts her administrative investigations, she has the authority to compel attendance and participation in her investigation. What that means is, and this is under threat of insubordination or like offense. What that means is if she says, officer, I need you to come in for an interview so that we can ask you questions pursuant to a complaint of misconduct, that officer must attend the interview and participate and answer the questions that she's asking of the officer. If that officer does not, she has the ability to refer that officer to CPD for action for discipline under insubordination or like offense. Because she can, under threat of insubordination, force an officer to participate in her investigation, if there is an ongoing criminal investigation, those two things are contradictory, because if someone is the suspect of an ongoing criminal investigation, they have a right to remain silent. They don't have to answer your questions at all. They have a right to representation and all of that. So it makes her ability under the contract moot, practically speaking, or very dangerous if she were to act on that, right? And so what we don't want to do is say there is an officer who has shot someone and he is going through a criminal investigation for homicide. We don't want the administrative investigation to potentially jeopardize an indictment for murder. Does that make sense? And so while we want to do all of the things, right, that we can do right away, it may not practically make sense. And while legally she can, under the contract, be a part of a criminal investigation and maybe run a parallel investigation, it may not always be prudent to do so because there are so many constitutional rights that are at play in the event an individual is being investigated for criminality. Does that make sense? In the event that someone is forced to respond, or an officer is forced to respond to questions about something that they have done that is under criminal investigation, that statement, whatever statements they make, and the fruits of those statements are going to be barred. They cannot be used in his criminal prosecution. Does that make sense? Do you have anything to add to that?
No, we've talked about parallel investigations at the Division of Police for years on and off because of the same frustrations you feel. Because you have to wait a long time to deal with it administratively while the criminal investigation is ongoing. But it's practically nearly impossible to do the parallel investigations, especially on something like a shooting where BCI is investigating it. The officer has constitutional rights. They're not going to participate in administrative processes while there's a pending criminal investigation. They're going to assert their rights.
And they don't have to, right?
They don't have to. And if you were to order them to speak under Garrity, you would be essentially undermining the ability to prosecute the case. So it's almost impossible to conduct these parallel investigations. And we've talked about it because, chiefs of police get frustrated with these issues hanging out there for a long time and the public feeling like the chief should be doing something. But it almost always comes around to you're better to wait for the criminal to be finished.
And I recall, unfortunately, he's not here today, and I don't remember if it was our last meeting or the one before, but Mr. Strickland had if you recall, was, I would say, suggesting rather forcefully that the Inspector General should in fact be doing the parallel, investigations. And so I'm hoping that the members who are not here, there are only two, that they will in fact look at this meeting. I've specifically asked that your materials be emailed to them so they actually, have it. But you might expect some questions from at least one board member on what you
It's a
just shared with
worthwhile,
us.
we've had these discussions many times. I mean, theoretically, could you do a parallel? Yes. But with a police-involved shooting investigation, you're going to have access to none of the evidence during the BCI or while at the grand jury. The officers aren't going to speak to you, so I don't know what that looks like exactly is the problem. Other issues, you still run into the same issues while criminal investigation's pending. You're not going to get participation from anybody who's under criminal investigation because they have constitutional rights. So could you theoretically, I suppose, if you had completely independent evidence, but that's extremely rare. And also, I think it's really dangerous to try to make decisions based maybe on a video without witness statements.
I asked them to advance the slide because we put some of these considerations up for you to take a look at about conducting these parallel investigations. And Jeff's talking about that first bullet point, what does BCI, chain of command, IAB take, what position do they take regarding parallel investigations? You don't want to do anything to compromise their investigations. we were talking about the rights of the person that's accused, but if you move down towards the last few bullet points, you know, I kind of put a phrase, interview fatigue in there, or witnesses, victims who may be questioned by BCI or chain of command, and then the IG then turns around and start interviewing them. They could be confused, they could be suspicious. Why are two different agencies interviewing them? They could give conflicting information to the agencies, and that could really detrimentally affect a criminal investigation. So there's all kinds of kind of practical considerations as to why it's not a good idea to do those parallel.
I think that's what it's drawn the intent to, is to let the law be the law.
Any other questions before we kind of swing into the third portion of the presentation? This was just in terms of complaint flow. We will kind of look at this chart as well, but we've talked about this briefly earlier about how do you file a complaint with the Department of Inspector General. Citizens unsworn may file a complaint, and this is where we talked about the writing or reduced to writing in terms of there's a hotline that you can call, and there's a main phone line. Those are all the different ways that a complaint can be filed. We also use some words interchangeably, received and filed. Basically, if it's been received, it's filed. Next slide. And so now if you want to go to the page that has that flow chart on it, so there's lots of arrows here. And when I first looked at it, I'm like, there's a lot of arrows here. But the more you just kind of focus on the green arrows or focus on the blue arrows and just understand. Yeah.
Just a quick question under citizens' complaint. So CPRB, the citizens will be referred to the Inspector General, correct?
Right.
So what that means to me is somebody I know says, hey, I got a complaint. Our job is not to tell the Inspector General. Our job is to say, you need to use the proper process. Is that correct?
Yeah, my understanding, at least one, if not more, previous meetings, this was discussed, where if somebody were to approach the board at a meeting or individually, you would direct them to the Department of Inspector General, to their office, to their website, to their form, and say, we are not going to accept the complaint. We're going to refer you to the DIG.
Thank you.
And for,
Make your timelines a lot cleaner, too.
Yeah.
and for individuals who are coming to meetings that want to file a complaint, there will be a member of the Department of Inspector General to do that intake at a meeting in the event they want to do that. But if you are not in a meeting and you're just being approached by a citizen who wants to file a complaint, they should be immediately directed to the Inspector
I
General.
bring that up for my fellow board members that, you know, don't accept the pressure that you are not the complaint receiving department.
Because if someone hands it to you in writing, then we're gonna have, well, the city received it in writing, at that point, the clock started running.
Okay.
So this slide talks about the ways that the citizen can file a complaint. You know, we've just mentioned through the DIG or the board. IAB is the last one. If you look at the flow chart in that green square citizen complaint, there's 3 green arrows to the Inspector General, to the review board. It's not really to the review board, but if they contact the board makes the referral to the IG. But the third one is IAB, Internal Affairs. And if that takes place, and Jeff or Tara, correct me if I'm wrong, they'll determine if it's whether it's criminal in nature or whether it's administrative in nature. And if it's criminal, they'll send it to the chain of command. And if it's administrative, they'll send it to the Inspector General.
As a good practice, if someone brings up a complaint to us and we send them to the IG, should we not then let the IG know we've had a complaint or
Okay.
to be expecting it?
Couldn't hurt.
Okay. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, and then this is what happened a few meetings ago, you know, and as Board Member Younger was talking about earlier, if something in the news comes to your attention, you're concerned that the 90-day window may run upon your own discussion and a motion and a second and a vote, you can initiate a complaint and forward it to the Department of Inspector General. Next. Okay, so this talks about a sworn personnel complaint, and if you look at the flow chart, again, the blue square, there's 4 arrows, and basically the 4 different ways. Now, earlier, and this, Jeff, where I may need your, can the sworn personnel go directly to the Department of Inspector General?
So we've talked about this. My understanding is, and the Inspector General may know this as well, I believe, if a sworn officer has a complaint and they're not comfortable making it within the division of police, they can go to the IG for that. We wanted them to have multiple avenues to make those complaints. We prefer those go through internal affairs, but if they say, look, I'm just not confident in those processes, they can go to the Inspector General. I believe that is what we agreed on.
And that's why we have that arrow going up to DIG. Again, if a sworn officer were to approach a board member or come to a meeting, again, they'd be referred to the IG. They can also file the complaint with IAB, same kind of analysis. IAB will figure out where it should go. And then the fourth arrow is the Equal Employment Office. And again, they'll determine jurisdiction, who the complaint is against, and they'll make the referral back to IAB if it's appropriate. Any questions about that? Okay, next one. So here's just the charts in front of you. If you just kind of follow the arrows, basically, they're explaining how citizens can file complaints, how sworn officers can file complaints, and once it gets to one of the four rectangles in the middle, then some of the arrows talk about who makes a referral to what agency or what department, and the black arrows talk about what events will toll time. If you want to go to the next slide. So the next few slides will talk about what happens when the IG gets the complaint, and we'll kind of reiterate some of the tolling events that Tara was talking about a little bit earlier. So we're using the matrix system. It's going to get assigned a unique ID number. The investigators from the department will conduct the investigations, and then ultimately, as the IG presented at a previous meeting, if a complaint's withdrawn, if there's insufficient information to proceed, it'll get closed. If it's a jurisdictional type of issue, the complaint can be forwarded to the appropriate agency. And then if there is actual additional investigation that's conducted, then there's going to ultimately be some type of recommendation and report that's going to be prepared, approved by the IG, and then forwarded to the board for review. Next slide. So what happens when the board gets these reports? Right now, it looks like we're forming committees, and we're having committees review the reports, and then we'll be making recommendations to the entire board. You can see by the bullet points here, based on any particular complaint, the board can decide to have a hearing if it wants to more fully flush out some issues. You can vote to have the matter back to the department for further investigation. You can adopt the recommendations and forward them to the chief of police or the director of public safety. And you can also reject the recommendations. That's fully within your authority to do that. Next slide. Okay, so here are the time considerations that Tara touched upon earlier. She mentioned the exceptions to the 90 days. I believe it was criminal on its face, or what was it, reasonably considered to be criminal if it goes to the city attorney's office, right? The tolling events, so that's also in the flow chart here. You'll see the lines that say time tolls. If it's with BCI, time is going to toll. If IEB forwards a complaint to the chain of command for a criminal investigation, it's going to toll. If the Department of Inspector General forwards a complaint, and again, these all line up with the arrows on the flow chart, or if the chain of command forwards a complaint to BCI. Those are all tolling events where the investigation timeframe will be suspended. And then Tara also talked about the FOP agreeing to an extension of time cannot be unreasonably withheld. I think this may be the last slide, or there may be one more, I'm not really sure. This may be the last slide. Basically, once the criminal investigation has concluded, and what we talked about was it's received by the appropriate prosecuting attorney's office and no billed. And there's going to be lines of communication between those agencies and the Inspector General so that there's timely notification if something does get no billed. I think that's the last slide, yep. Any questions about the flow chart, the last few slides, the tolling events? A lot to digest. We're always available, phone call, email, in person.
I think to kind of help with the flow of that in terms of follow-up, if after you have a chance to digest this and think about it, would you send your question to me? You have my email, and then I will decide, who gets it. It may also be one where we may forward the response to all members of the board. So, please do that. Again, thank you so much for this. I think it was extremely, extremely helpful. And I know that you need to leave, but, so before we take our break, and this is also giving you, I think you'll be up at 4 o'clock, I think. Okay, hopefully a little bit before. I am literally going to make assignments now. I'm going to rely on Bethany to take all of this down and then to confer with me. I mean, because right now it's handwritten. I just want to show you, this is the total number of complaints that we have received and that I will be assigning today. Each board member, not just the reviewing committee, should have all of these. And you should review them before our next board meeting. I think there'll be greater efficiency in that. Questions that you might, ask at the board meeting might be answered, in here. So each board member will receive the entire, at this point, these are all the ones that are completed, and you will receive these.
Do we have an option of not getting it in paper? There's a paper sort, it's fine.
You will receive them via email.
Okay, perfect.
Okay? I didn't ask that these be printed. Some of us, and maybe it's via our age, and I don't mind sharing that 1 week from today is my 70th, I want paper. But, pardon?
Me too, Chair.
And,
The Amazon compatible. That's what,
and I don't want to wear my printer out at home, so that's sometimes why I make the request. So let's get started. Team 1, as a reminder, I am asking Pastor Rich Nathan to be the chair, and his team members are Ms. Burns and Dr. Jones. Now, each, in terms of numbers, each one will start with 2022, so that's, of course, the year, and I'm not going to keep repeating that, and then it will have a 4-digit number, okay? So for Team 1, you will have complaints 0002, 0003, 0004, 0066. You will also have, and this next one is unusual. It has 2 different numbers, 0021/0019. But I think it was treated as just one report. 0026, 0029, 0051, 0054, 0059, 0153. Team 2, I'm asking Kyle Strickland to chair, and the members are Reverend Tatum and Mary Younger. So again, starting with 2022, 0005, 0008, 0010, 0011, 0035, 0041, 0045, 0088, 0097, 0098, 0163. And our final team, I've asked Mr. McIntosh to be the chair. Members would be Mr. Fluharty and Ms. Aragon. And yours are 0013, 0014, 0016, 0049, 0048, 0052, 0057, 0105, 0134, 0137, and 0176. So again, with our executive assistant, I'll go over these again. She'll make a master list, and she will email it to everyone with your numbers. Okay?
Now, question.
Yes.
As Gambit brought up, email, for those of us that want printed, how will that work? Will they be given to us in the mail, email? We got to pick them up.
Well, mailing, I mean, how many,
I'll have mine emailed and then print my own.
okay, all right.
Give them your stash, Janet.
Pardon?
You can print some more out, you said.
Oh, no, I'm not.
She got lively then.
Yes, Inspector General.
So what we could do is either print them and have you pick them up, or we will print them and we will deliver them to you. Wow.
Oh, Mr. Furby, you get delivered, you get your stuff delivered to you.
Okay, so, again, we can, chat, and, so these can get out hopefully, by Monday, or even, no, I won't do that to you. I can do it tomorrow. Oh, okay,
That's good.
okay. Okay. Let's take a break until, I'm gonna say 3:45, 3:50, that gives us 50 minutes to 3:50. Let's get back because I'm sure that we are all anxious and ready to hear from the Training and Education Committee. They're gonna have us completely ready to review these. We are. Okay.
We're gonna kill it.
We're going to resume our meeting, and I'm going to turn matters over to Dr. Jones.
Well, hello, everybody. We are ready to go ahead and get started. I think as soon as they pull up our PowerPoint here, we will get going. And while she's pulling that out, I just want to say we're kind of going to tag team this training for everybody. So you're going to hear from Mark, you're going to hear from Mac, and you're going to hear from Gambit because everybody has different roles. And Kyle is here in spirit. Yeah, Kyle is here in spirit. He gave some input that we will be addressing today as well. And so I think this complements very well with what the attorneys presented earlier. In terms of our roles, I did already make some notes on how we might change one of these documents here, but we can go ahead and move forward. So the purpose of today's training, we are going to talk about investigation reviews, and I've been very intentional on calling it an investigation review just to distinguish that from an investigation. We are not conducting investigations, we are conducting investigation reviews. And so some of the agenda that we're going to do some introductions so you can hear from the Training and Education Subcommittee. We'll talk about what's in an investigation report. We're going to actually leverage our Inspector General since she is here, and it's her report. She's going to provide an overview of what exactly is in it. We're going to go over an investigation review checklist or worksheet, and it's to help you as you do your reviews of the ones that you've just been assigned, which we have a lot. And then we are actually going to put you through an activity. So we have some investigations for you to review with the worksheet, and we're going to see whether or not you agree or disagree with the conclusion. We're going to have a discussion about that, and then that is going to conclude our time. So you can go ahead to the next slide. And so let me just ask our wonderful training members, in about 30 seconds, would you all introduce yourselves?
Mark Bluehardy. I am the Executive Director of the Central Ohio Labor Council.
Thank you.
Willard McIntosh, retired CPD officer.
Gambit Aragon, community organizer.
Thanks. And I'm Dr. Chanel Jones, I work at Franklin University. I'm a professor over there. And then Kyle, who is our not here attorney, but that's his introduction. All right, you can go ahead. So right now we are going to do an investigation report overview. And so what I have asked the Inspector General to do is to just come up and discuss each of the elements of the investigation report that we will be receiving from her office. And this will help you all better understand what the different components of are that comprise the report. And then that'll also help facilitate your review of that report. So you can go to the next slide, and then Inspector General, if you want to go ahead and take this part.
Thank you.
And Inspector General, before you start, and I consider it rude, but I'm going to be multitasking because I want to send not this, but to reduce all of this, and I'm going to send it to you before the meeting is over. Okay, thank you.
Just kind of going over, I think everyone should have like a little mock report, so if you just want to see the outline, but I'm just going to go through this real quick. So when you get the report is going to have what the DIG complaint number is. That's going to be located. That is generated when we get the complaint and is entered into the matrix system. Below that, you'll see a summary. What the summary is, it should be a brief summary of the complaint and the investigation findings. We just kind of want to give you an overview of what you're going to be looking at. And then below that, when we get into, and if I go too fast, please tell me, I'll slow down. Then you'll get to where it says the complaint information. That's going to tell you the date of the incident. So that lets us know when the incident occurred. It's going to tell you the date of the complaint. The date of the complaint is when we enter it into our system. So the date of the incident and complaint could possibly be different, but the date of the complaint is when we enter that into our matrix system. And then you're going to have the type of complaint that it is. It's going to either be a misconduct or excessive use of force. And a misconduct will be followed up by giving you a little bit more information. It could be something like actions taken, not taken by an officer. It could be profanity. It could be use of profanity. It could be conduct unbecoming. So the misconduct will give you a little bit more information, and that should only be if you see the misconduct part. Excessive use of force stands by itself. Then it's going to get into what the allegation is. So you may have more than one allegation, but the allegation will tell you exactly what the complainant is alleging, and so this is what the office was investigating. After that, you'll get into the officer's information. The officer's information is the officers that the report has identified is involved in the incident. So those would be the ones that the complaint is going to be looking at and letting you know what type of actions they took and what the findings will be on those officers' actions. The finding and analysis part of the investigation, this is the details of the investigation that was conducted. It should be a lot of information in there. They're going to start off usually telling you that they interviewed the complainant and what the complainant actually said. And then it gets into what the steps were that the investigator took. So you're going to also see information about anything that the investigator read, like any police reports, any CAD reports, any body-worn camera, any cruiser video information, and they also will talk about the policies and procedures during this part of your finding and analysis. So not only will they tell you exactly what the complainant says and what they're looking at in the investigation, but they'll tell you whether or not the findings that they're looking at, whether it violated policy and procedure. So this is really the details and the meat of the investigation. there will be footnotes in the reports also. So if you're looking at an allegation and you want to say, okay, they're saying it was a violation of policy and procedure, there will be footnotes that will reference, again, the policy procedures. The footnotes will also reference any dates that the investigators, when they talk to the complainant, or if they talk to witnesses, or they talk to the officers, they'll footnote that, so you'll be able to see what dates and times this occurred. So the conclusion is going to be what the conclusion was of the investigation. It'll be a summary also, but what they'll say is, whatever the finding and analysis is, the conclusion will come to whether or not it is concluded that the officer's actions violated policy and procedure, or whether the officer's actions was supported or in compliance with policies and procedures. That will be what your conclusion is. It will also state whether or not the actions were sustained, unfounded, exonerated, and there's a list of the different findings on the back. But you will find this in the conclusion section. When it comes to the evidence is going to give you information also. The evidence will tell you who was interviewed. It'll give you the names. It may also footnote the dates and times that they interviewed the persons. The evidence will also give you a list of the documents that the investigator used and reviewed during the investigation. So again, it should list any body cam footage, CAD reports. They will also give you additional information. So if they reviewed a police report, it'll have the police report number, CAD report, body cams, cruiser video, any information. It will also list the policies that the investigator used while they were reviewing the allegations. So they'll list the policies also in this section. And the recommendation part is the recommendation that is going to the board. The recommendation comes directly from me. I look at all the reports, documents, review the body cam, I look at everything. And so I write a recommendation to the board. Either I'll concur with what I'm looking at. Sometimes I put additional information because there may be a little bit of clarity that I just might feel that the board might need to flesh out a little bit more in the report. But the recommendation will either be, again, whether the officer violated policy and procedure, and it will also reference whether or not the allegation was exonerated, sustained, or further information there.
All right, thank you. Appreciate that. So that's basically an overview of what is exactly the different elements that comprise an investigation report. And so now we're going to have Gambit talk about some of the things that you should keep in mind when doing this. And remember, we're conducting an investigation review. So Gambit is going to reiterate that for all of us.
Yeah, so, as we're going through these, obviously we should keep in mind that the investigation has already been done. All we are doing is reviewing the findings of that investigation and make sure that we all stay in our lanes, I guess, that way. So use the checklist, though, when you are conducting or going and reviewing these cases that you're, presented with. The checklist is actually going to be very, it's really self-explanatory and very helpful. And it does, as you'll see further on, it does give us an ability to also write in certain findings that we have or questions that we may find. So also be very careful when reviewing the investigation reports. Indicate whether we want to be really clear about whether we agree or disagree, right? Especially if it is, I don't know, if we all find ourselves, tackling a really sensitive kind of case. We want that finding to be, and it to be very clear to the IG that we are all not in agreement with that. So, and honestly, and after we just heard that we have 180 days, we really should be very clear when we're finishing our reviews that way. So there's no ambiguity, and that's it. What do I have? That's it, right?
Yeah, that's it. Thank you. Thanks, Gambit. And then Mark, because he has done this before, he's going to talk about some of the things that you should be looking for as you're conducting an investigation review. So if you go, you're already there. Thank you. So go ahead, Mark.
First of all, I think you can really simplify your investigation with 5 words. who, what, when, where, and why. I've done hundreds of investigations, and it really comes down to those 5 basic words. And if you can answer all 5 of those questions, you have done a good, thorough review of the investigation, because that investigation, if it does not answer every one of those questions, really didn't get completed. So in here, you know, we have a checklist form, which I think is very helpful, and thank Dr. Jones for all of her hard work for helping to develop that. But we have to make sure that there's a complaint number and how the complaint was classified. What are the allegations? You know, you got to make sure you know what the person is accused of. Were they properly identified? Did the action violate a policy? So you need to know what the policy actually is. Are the policies referenced and reviewed? So in the investigation, did the investigator actually talk about what the policy was and why or why not it wasn't violated? Were interviews conducted? Who was there? Was it in person? Was it virtual, by phone? One thing I always insist on in my own investigations is make sure you capture all of the witnesses and leave no stone unturned when there's a witness. Was it recorded? Did the investigator document this information? If they didn't, you cannot properly do a review. Was evidence obtained and reviewed? How was it obtained? How was it reviewed? Does the written summary include information from interviews and evidence? Does the evidence support the findings? Don't try to insert your own personal thoughts and opinions into the evidence. Stay to the facts. Get the facts. And it's as simple as that. Don't overcomplicate it. It's really pretty basic. Capture the 5 W's, and you'll have done a very thorough review of the person's investigation. Dr. Jones?
Thank you, Mark. I appreciate you. You can go ahead to the next slide. So now that Mark has given us some tips and tools on what to look for as we conduct an investigation, I want to introduce you all to what we are calling the investigation review checklist. So if you can pull that up, it's kind of tiny on the screen up there, but you have a physical document in front of you. So if you can pull that up, and I want to go over that. So looking at, first off, I want to just talk about NACO really quick, because they were supposed to provide us with a checklist, and thank you, Bethany, for reaching out multiple times. They just kind of went ghost on us. And so I actually...
We haven't sent them a check for membership yet, have we?
No, we have not.
Okay.
We have not.
Is it in the mail?
It's not, because in our time of need, they did not come through. But here's the wonderful thing. We are resourceful, and so we leaned into other civilian review boards. We also looked at best practices through the Department of Justice, and then also some input from our Inspector General. And we were able to create this investigation review. This says worksheet, so we'll go with that. And so if you look at it, it has a couple of things that are on the reports, so that'll help give you some guidance as you're actually conducting the review. So the first thing is it has the complaint number. Now, this is a hard copy of the document. There's also an electronic version that you can type directly into the document to save paper, because we know Gambit is environmentally friendly in all of his ways. And so we can make sure you can type directly into the document. But it has a couple of things. The date the complaint was filed, the date the complaint was closed. The date that the complaint was closed will always be the same as the date submitted to the CRB. And so I want to make sure everybody is clear, because we are working on some strict timelines here that we have to be mindful of. And so those are the same dates. Here you can put the name of the investigator, and then you can also put your name on there as well. How the complaint is classified, on the electronic version, there is actually a drop-down box. So if you click the arrow pointing down, it will give you several options that basically align with what the Inspector General was talking about. If it's misconduct, use of force, or different things like that, you'll be able to go and select exactly what it is. And then what are the findings? There's also a drop-down box there, whether or not it was exonerated or unfounded or all the other options that you have. And then there are some things that we would like you to look for, that you should be looking for. Were all allegations properly identified? Was there a policy violation? Policies, were they reviewed and cited? Were the officers interviewed? Were civilian witnesses interviewed? And then this is where we would like, your input as you're reviewing this. Do you think the investigator interviewed all relevant persons? And if not, you can write on the document who you think should have also been interviewed. And then you can also indicate, should additional witnesses have been interviewed, and the question under that. Should additional officers be interviewed? There's an area where you can put if the interviews were recorded, and then also what type of evidence. And you notice on the report, there's an actual list of the evidence, and you can go on this document and you can click or check the types of evidence that was used for the investigation. And then the question after that is, are you satisfied that the investigator investigated that allegation? And if not, you can write your reasons as to why. Similar with the summary, does it accurately reflect the information provided in those interviews? You can put your text of whether or not you agree with that. There is one part that we added with further documentation. So if there was anything missing that you just didn't have access to for whatever reason that would have helped you been better at reviewing this, you can put that information down. And then is there a summary of the findings and a justification? Yes.
From that last one, it just came to mind even. It was, is there any way to maybe right after that last one amend a section where you can request the evidence that you want?
We can.
Does that make sense? Because yeah.
Good question. And I actually have another amendment that I'm going to make is if we send these back to the IG, to put the date that it was sent back. So these are two amendments that we have to this document. So as I'm going through this, if you all see anything else, let me know so I can do all the amendments at one time.
I'll jump in then. I want to know how the board will have access to the date the complaint closed. Because right now it's not on the report. And so if you want to have that date, we'll just add it to the report that the IG sends to you.
If you can add it to the report. I thought it was on the
Like
report.
our deadline date for the.
No, the date.
It has the date of the complaint and the date of the incident right now.
No, it has the date complaint was filed and the date that it was closed. So we looked at closed as to when it goes from the IG's office to.
It's not on her report. So we can add that unless
okay.
you guys are going to have access to Matrix where you can find it.
Did I miss that? Oh, we need that date.
The date the complaint is closed or submitted to CPRB.
Yeah.
That will be the date that you sign it, is going to be the date that you submit it, same day? Perfect.
So for this one, it would be November the
3rd,
3rd.
2022.
Okay, so we'll
I
just
wanted
have
to make
to
sure you knew.
remember that, everybody make a note of that the date the IG signs it is the date the complaint was closed and the date that is submitted to the CRB. So that's all the same date. Perfect. Good questions. All right. We go back to that second sheet. There's a question. As you're reviewing it, does the evidence in file support the findings? You can click yes or no and then write. And then here's these last three questions are the really important ones as well. I mean, all of them are important, but these are important as well. Number one, do you agree with the conclusion of the investigation? This is your opportunity to write down and make note of whether or not you agree or disagree with the outcome, and then provide some type of justification. Were there any other actions and behaviors in the situation that you should think, that you believe or think should be investigated? And that is because some reports may come in and the behavior is well within policy, but there are other things that happened in that particular situation. And you say, oh, this officer, I don't know, he didn't hit, well, he may have hit somebody or that was within policy, but he also cussed, and that's an issue too. And so I think we should investigate that. This your opportunity to indicate whether or not something else should be investigated. And then any any additional comments or recommendations based on this complaint. As you were going through all of the reports, one of the things we want you all to keep in mind is to look at and consider the broader picture. So if you are seeing repeat behaviors, if you are seeing issues that may have raised policy concerns or things like that, that you make note of that, because we're going to send all of these back to the IG, and then she can determine how to best move forward with this information. And so that is basically this document in a nutshell. Again, it's just designed to provide you with some guidance. What we are asking for is you all to take a moment to do this, and then and to look at this, and this is, excuse me, I'm getting tongue-tied. There's an electronic version of this document. We can also make printed copies of this document. I would say just let me make the last 2 amendments that we had and resend it back out to everybody before we move forward with that. But for the purposes of today's activity, we will definitely be able to use it. But this is the investigation review worksheet. And so our hope is that after you complete this individually, by individually reviewing the cases, and you meet with your group, you take all of your sheets back to your group, y'all review all of them together, and then you complete one copy that reflects all of your thoughts and opinions and send that to the Inspector General.
So that was my next question. After our review, we send a hard copy or by email, however, to the IG.
Yes.
All right.
It goes to the IG before it comes to the board?
That's what I.
Oh,
I mean,
I'm
because
sorry,
this is the subcommittee, it's not
Sorry,
the full board.
we're missing a step. We're missing a step. Yes, it should come back to the board
Comes to the
first.
board.
Chair, we're done with our review. Where does our report go?
Yeah. So after you meet as the group, then it should go back to the board to just make sure everybody is in agreement with what is indicated.
I got you, but when
So-
you say back to the board, who is that?
It's in our rules and regulations that the subcommittees will then report out to the full board about whether the subcommittee agrees with the recommendations for each individual report that each subcommittee.
So your recommendations, I mean, you could send them to me, but quite frankly, they're going to end up with our support team over here so that copies can be made and distributed to the full board at the meeting where we're going to be discussing these.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
for example, I don't know the date of our next meeting, but the December meeting,
It's be December 6th.
right.
So what the best thing for them, after they meet as a subcommittee, to send the investigation review worksheet that they agreed on to Bethany
And to me.
and to,
May I ask a question?
Go to her first, and then she can give it to Bethany to make.
As far as I'm concerned, it can also go to her. I mean, so.
I just want to know what the step is going to be. Is it going to be you? Is it going to be her? Is it?
Before you
Yes.
answer that, if I may interject here, hypothetically, could you envision a situation whereby there are minor questions that could be answered prior to it being sent to the entire board that could clarify something easily that doesn't necessarily need to be discussed amongst the entire board? So if a committee has a minor question that they can send back to the IG pursuant to their investigation review, that can be answered, and then the group has a
So
consensus.
give me an example of a minor.
Well, that's a good question, Chair. All right, so
Remember,
how about is
I
this?
used to be a lawyer.
Yes, ma'am.
I used to be.
So let me try to create one, because as a lawyer, you know, it always depends. Hypothetically speaking, if there was an investigation report and the subgroup agreed on everything, but why wasn't this individual interviewed? And they sent that question back to the IG, and the IG said, oh, you know what? They were interviewed, or they weren't interviewed because they actually weren't a part of the sequence of events that happened, and that answer is sufficient to the subcommittee. Then they could come to a consensus about the review of that particular complaint and then send that to the board. What I'm trying to do from a timeline perspective, you're under strict timelines, so to try to streamline what back and forth to the IG looks like is probably going to be very important. And hopefully, by the time it comes to the full board, there aren't these really big outstanding questions that need to be answered.
Yeah, I concur. I mean, obviously, we are under the deadline there to get that to her as soon as possible. And sometimes we may not have the luxury of actually waiting until we meet the next time.
I'm sorry, start again, please.
There's a sense of urgency of getting these back to her as soon as possible with our decision on whether we agree with it or not. And sometimes we may not have the luxury of time to meet at the next meeting, especially, I'm not 100% bought on, or 100% like sure on the specific that you used or the
Hypothetical?
example.
Sure.
But I would like to not necessarily wait until, that next month to actually talk about these, especially if it's a very pressing issue. Like
And a pressing timeline, and
Yeah.
if you're meeting once a month, that's 30 days. And so any questions that could potentially be answered
And we've
prior
already-
to the
yeah.
board meeting, I think is going to be important.
We've already indicated that our meetings may need to be adjusted. I mean, one of the things we just don't know at this point is workload and everything else. And so I have indicated to the full board that may need to change. But I don't know that. I don't know that yet. Maybe I will after, the next meeting.
Sure.
I would only ask the reviewing committees to be very judicious in terms of reaching out to the IG. Just, if it's something that can be clarified, easily, then I would suggest that it be your chair who would actually make, the contact. But that should be the exception and not the rule. Okay?
That makes sense, and I understand the full determination about whether or not you're going to agree with her findings or send it back needs to be a board decision, absolutely. But if there are questions in between that decision that subcommittees can make so that your meeting runs as smoothly as possible and we can drill down timelines and streamline timelines, I would make that suggestion to you all to think
I
about.
would think that the investigators in the IG should get very rare questions if they're doing their jobs properly.
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to make a comment, because I know as the board is reviewing some of the investigations, there are investigations that you're going to see where the investigators pulled the body cams, and they were able to see everything involving what the allegation was. And it also states in the FOP, they may not have interviewed the officer because the video cam clearly showed what happened. So those, I just wanted to make that because that's in relations to what Tiara said. So again, we know that as the board is doing that, they might have said, oh, well, they didn't investigate, they didn't interview that person. But, just be mindful that the information that you're getting may have, and the report will state, that it clearly showed what the officer's action was.
In one of our mock cases, thank you.
Well, I'm still really concerned as to, okay, so we're getting these things, all we're getting is paper, so we're not getting these. If I have a question about, this interaction, this footage for example, and I want to see it for myself, because I'm not feeling exactly that description of how the events went, like I'd like to, get my eyes on that before making my decision on whether I agree with you or not. That is, to me, where I feel like, like if those types of special requests are asked by board members, it could further delay the process if there isn't something already set up. And I don't think that these go. I don't think that these go directly to the board right off the bat. I still haven't made my decision. I still need to get with you or get with someone with your staff to help me understand the findings better, or support them better, I guess, right? And if I need to look at that video, I would like time to see that. So that is just something I want to, sort of have everyone keep in mind a little bit because of time.
I think part of what you said is relevant for sure, because you aren't going to have access to unredacted body cam like the IG has. She has an MOU. She's been considered law enforcement for the purposes of reviewing body cam. If you want to review body cam from that incident, that will have to be a public records request. Again, that will take time. So thinking about how to streamline, how to quickly ask for that as soon as possible is going to be very important. Rob and I have already discussed particularly the body cam issue. And so if there are review board members that want to actually see the evidence that was looked at by the investigator, that is something that you're going to have to consider in your timelines for review.
Let me just ask you this, because I thought this came up during one of our last meetings, and we were told we had to go through some kind of training or something to be able to access the body cam, and I thought that
We were
it
gonna
was
do
it
that.
was said that we could do that.
Yeah.
So it came back to us from leads that they are not going to be able to identify you all or fit you all within the definition of law enforcement. They can do that in a way for the Inspector General because she's actually completing the investigations. Because you are merely reviewing those, they can't fit you within that definition that would allow you to review unredacted body cam with the training and with the MOU. So the general rule is
They're not available to us.
exactly.
So when was y'all gonna tell us this?
Available.
That could be my bad.
I was going to respond and then I said nope.
No,
I'm not gonna do that.
I received an email at some point.
All right. Well, back to the investigation review and just trusting with the inspectors.
Well, you can take my amendment out. We can't request anything.
Oh, yeah, so we're back
You
to one
can.
amendment.
It's a public records request, and you have to, fit in that, consider that timeline for the receipt of that in your.
Yeah.
So we're just gonna trust that you all do a very good and thorough job back there. All right. So that is this worksheet. You can go ahead to the next slide. So Mac is going to walk you through this exercise. We're at 4:26, so we got a few minutes to do it. So you can go ahead and give him the instructions.
So you should have two mock investigations.
Let's have him do Jane Smith first.
Okay. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to review the report provided by the DIG, which is the Jane Smith 2022-0000. Complete the checklist. So as you're reviewing the report, complete the checklist, indicate whether you do or do not agree with the findings. And number 3, let's discuss it. Be prepared to discuss your conclusion with the rest of the group. So I guess we can start reading, going over that 10-minute.
Time frame here.
I just want it noted that, for the record, this is really small, trying to follow through.
Should have one in print.
Oh, do we?
Yeah, you should have one in print someplace.
Where?
I don't know.
Should be in your packet.
Right.
There's one right there.
Thank you.
Is that what you look?
Oh, okay.
Are you looking for this?
No, I'm looking for this.
Investigation review sheet, worksheet, that's what he's looking for.
Thank you.
Good job for you being proactive. All right, we are at 10 minutes, so let's take a moment to talk about this. And sorry we have to kind of speed through, but we have another case that we want you all to review. So any comments, questions, concerns about that particular case? We have Jane Smith, who filed a complaint. She says she heard some shots, says the officers didn't do anything. I think that's what it was. So any questions, comments, concerns about this report?
I don't see an interview of Officer White.
Wasn't no interview, they said they reviewed CAD. I don't see where there was any review of the officer.
And he has no body-worn camera,
His partner, they reviewed
and he
his
has
partner.
no dash cam going on, other than a conversation that they overhear from Officer Brown and him having.
Good point.
I don't see how do I know that he talked to the family?
That's right,
There's no
because-
documentation of who they were.
Who they were.
Good points, good points. Did you?
From the checklist that I was wondering about. I know from previous meetings that interviews are recorded on an audio device, but I didn't see it in the report. So maybe a footnote, I think there's a footnote that talks about, footnote 5, interviewed by Columbus DIG investigator via phone. I might just note that it was recorded. And then I didn't see what time this was alleged to have occurred. The reason why I think that's important is if the citizen thinks the officer intentionally drove past her and didn't see her. If it's dark, I'm assuming that would make it more likely that the officer really just didn't see her. And so I was curious just about what time it was alleged
That
to
it
have occurred.
happened.
Yep.
Very good point as well. Any other questions?
You know, and the other question I have, I noticed that they said that they assumed that it might have been fireworks. If it was fireworks, then someone probably would have seen, you know, something, if it was fireworks.
The 4 minutes is struck us, is a little discerning to me. I mean, they talked to witnesses and did all this in 4 minutes. It says here, the officers entered their disposition 4 minutes after arriving and investigating the incident. So everything was done in 4 minutes. Am I reading that correctly?
Yes.
Okay, I'm a little suspect there.
Mac, you were a police officer. Would
Yeah,
you
I
like
figured,
to
yeah.
speak to that?
Well, maybe, the officers maybe should have spent a little bit more time on it, but I don't think there's anything in the policy that says they have to spend X amount of time on it. And there wasn't a shot spotter, right, to have a better location of where it's at. And then it also mentioned in there that if there was a shot spotter, they would have to investigate 25 meters out or whatever. Yeah. That didn't happen. So based on that, they were following policy, right?
Correct.
The thing that I would like is for, after that investigation, so that we're not leaving that citizen hanging, we got to go back and debrief her on what we found.
Yeah,
Right.
but she said she wanted to remain.
She did.
Anonymous,
Exactly.
but then she gonna come out there and start flagging somebody down.
Right,
You know
right, exactly. So she did want to remain anonymous, but then I guess she changed her mind.
Correct, yes.
Okay, so the defense attorney in me was like, all right, so if ShotSpotter didn't pick it up, does that mean ShotSpotter wasn't working? Was it not detecting anything? I think for purposes of public records, if folks start to request these reports, maybe a quick blurb defining what ShotSpotter is. I know what it is, but I don't know that the general public is gonna know what it is. And so to the extent that either the woman who made the complaint or anyone else wants, is gonna look at this, I think at least saying a very general statement about what ShotSpotter is and how it operates is gonna be good to add to that footnote about reviewing the ShotSpotter policy.
I think that's a very good suggestion.
What is a shot spotter?
I should let someone who is okay with ShotSpotter define what it is, because I will probably say it in a way that is snarky.
Well, even snarky. What is a shot spotter?
So it's technology that is strategically placed in certain neighborhoods within the city of Columbus. There you go. And they are able to detect when a shot is fired in that area, and then officers are automatically dispatched to that particular
So it's not
area.
somebody up on a tall building with binoculars?
Not exactly.
No.
The way it's been explained to me, though, that shot spotter can be pretty precise. Because it can give you an approximation, you know, that's pretty detailed in to where those shots originated.
Well, the way
Triangulation, yeah.
what I've heard is that it's that anything can set it off, and it's very expensive, and the money could be used in much better ways.
Of the constitutionality of shot spotter, I just wanted to know what it was.
I did want to sort of like piggyback on Brooke's point that it's not as specific as I would like it to be. Like, what neighborhood are we in? You know, for some of us, we live in some of these places, right? So, you know, the time of day, to Brooke's point, and, you know, where were we, you know, that this happened and stuff? Was it in a back alley, et cetera, et cetera?
Yeah, I think those are all great points and suggestions, and that's why we have all of our investigators here. So hopefully they are all taking notes that we would like times. Yes?
If the complainant provides, you know, identifies themselves first of all, and provides their address, that's usually going to be up here where it says complainant's information. We will
Okay.
list what the address is.
Richard, do you have a microphone you can use?
I do not, ma'am, I'm sorry. No, so all I was saying, is it on? All I was saying is that if, like in this case, the complainant originally was not identified, wanted to remain anonymous, if the complainant does identify themselves and they give their address, that information is provided where it says complainant's information at the top of the investigative report is going to be up there with any information that we have about the complainant. So you will know what neighborhood.
Name up here, because you want to remain anonymous.
All right.
And if the
Yes.
incident happened in a place that wasn't the complainant's address, I think
We
in
would've
that
given
incident,
address.
you
We
would
would've told-
you would have
we would've
given
told
the
you that in
location
that-
of the incident.
In the
Okay.
summary.
So it's just Jane Doe.
All right, so for the purposes that we are at 4:45, did you agree or disagree with the conclusion of the investigation? Or y'all want me to just tell you what you should have did?
Why don't you do that?
For this particular one, you should agree with it because the officers acted within policy. We're at 4:46, so take a few minutes to read that second report.
I need at least 5 minutes.
Okay.
for-
Madam Chair needs 5 minutes, so we're going to probably have you all read that in 5 minutes so we can keep this thing moving. Give y'all one more minute.
All right, questions, comments, thoughts about the second one? Yes.
I noticed that the first thing I see is that we don't have any badge numbers.
Good observation, good
There are
observation.
no badge numbers for Officer Hill and Miller.
Very good observation. Yes. What else do y'all observe about this one? Yes.
I'm not clear on this. I'm very confused because they went out there, there were two incidences. The first incident, it says that the neighbor, that someone pointed a gun at his wife. We don't have the names of the individual who is accused of pointing the firearm. So was anyone interviewed? Was anything checked out to see if the officers, should they have written a report? Who was the neighbor? I mean, was anything investigated as far as that allegation? And then the second one, there was a baseball bat involved. She was assaulted with a baseball bat. Was the wife, did anybody look at the wife? Was she really assaulted with a baseball bat? Did she have any evidence of that on her body? Was there a perpetrator? Did somebody, who was the witness? Was anybody interviewed? Were any of these allegations truthful?
All very good questions. And to answer your one, there's a little footnote that says, despite several attempts to the complainant, this investigator was unable to obtain documentation confirmation regarding any injuries.
Yeah.
But very, very good observations. Any other observations? There's a big one. There's a big one.
What's CAD report?
CAD reports.
Oh, okay. That is what?
What's that?
Well, my
Computer-
question is, does the officer have the ability to change what the call is for? Because the original call come in and said there's a gun. They decided that it was just a disturbance and changed the call.
There's a couple of hands up here. Back here. Yes.
If you want to, CAD is computer aided dispatch or data. And what it is, all information has to do with the run that's transcribed from the dispatchers. And anything the officers say, vice versa, is on a computer report. And we can access that. And that way we know what officers were there, what times, who was involved, what were the officers told, what the 911 dispatcher said that was transcribed in the run, and then the disposition.
So if you all, and this is because we're kind of getting short for time, if you all go to the last page, what's under recommendations? If you all notice right there, it says none. And there should be something written there under recommendations. So based off of all the concerns and things that you all raised, are we agreeing or disagreeing with this one? Disagreeing is the correct response. You should disagree with this report. Good job, everybody. You can go to the next slide, actually next couple slides. Keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going. So, some of the key takeaways here. Remember, we're conducting investigation reviews. The primary focus is on policy violations, but keep in mind the broader picture. Decide whether or not you agree or disagree with the findings in the investigation. Always remember to note, there are several areas within that document that you can make notes of actions, behaviors that you particularly think are concerning. Any type of recommendations that you have for policy changes, you can also put that on the form as well. You can go to that last slide. I think there's one more. And so we added a step between 4 and 5, and that would just be that it needs to come back to the board first before it actually goes to the IG, unless you have a question. And as Chair Jackson said, remember, reach out to her judiciously. Make sure you actually know what you would like to ask, and we're not inundating her with 1.5 million questions. And the chair of or the team lead of your group should be doing that as well. And so I hope this was helpful for everybody, just to give some kind of guidance on how to review. Now you have your assignments, and so you can go forth and be great. Chair Jackson is back on you.
Thank you. Ms. Ross, in thinking about December's meeting and the whole hearing, off the top, are you thinking 30 minutes?
I think so. We
But-
can, we can work together before December to make sure it's
Okay,
30.
30 minutes. I'm just concerned about the, getting through all of these at our next meeting.
Surely don't expect us to come back and every group report their 10 findings and every question get answered in 30 minutes.
I'm sorry. She's getting 30 minutes
Oh,
to
gotcha.
talk about if we are having public hearings.
Thank you.
And then the balance of the time, except
Go
for
to
a
the
break,
rest.
is all this work.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay.
I had some questions that I don't think that we were able to answer within the training committee as to how we are, after we have signed off on these and sent them to you and they've entered into your system, and then they go off for recommendation, how does the public see these things? And how are we guaranteeing that they're secure? How are we guaranteeing that they're secure as they're getting to the IG? First of all, I thought that it was an online form, which that was why I was asking about the security question. It sounds like we're just gonna, where do we do this online one that we were just on?
Oh, it's an electronic document. Now, if you want to, can we
That's what I'm
convert this
saying.
into an online form or something like that? Maybe we use like Microsoft Forms or something like
Yeah,
that.
I
But
just want to
don't
make sure that
know
it's
what
secure, first
security
and foremost,
purposes
before
and things like that.
we, decide to all use it in that system and stuff. And then also, after that process, how does it become a public record so that, anyone that wants to access these reports and our findings can actually see them?
So the document itself will be a public record as soon as it is created, and it will be given to whoever requests it upon request. Upon written request to the city, it'll go through any redactions that it needs to go through. It is not your responsibility, nor are you required to put it out there for public consumption, but it is available upon request should a member of the public request those documents. I think what I'm hearing is, it sounds like you all are going to be discussing in a public meeting, right? What your recommendations are going to be. So that's one way the public is going to be able to know what your decisions are. And the next thing is both admin for the board and for the IG will be here during those meetings. If you want to have hard copies available for them to take back in person, that to me appears to be secure enough to make sure that the chain of custody that you seem to be concerned about is taken care of.
Cool.
Thank you. The January meeting, we need to address this today. So, New Year's Day, in terms of a day off holiday, is actually January 2nd. Our meeting is currently scheduled for January the 3rd. There was a thought that that was just too close to that holiday. And so, pardon?
We're saying yes. We're saying yes, it is too close.
I would ask which country would we be going to.
We haven't decided.
Yeah, okay. So we're going to do a poll, and I think probably maybe just kicking it to the next week to just leave that week entirely alone. And so maybe trying to, so polling for the 10th and the 11th, so that would be a Tuesday and a Wednesday. And Bethany will do that ASAP, so we can lock in the January date. Now, Bethany's asked me this question twice, so I think she has concerns. And so I need my board members to really think about this. Again, these are all of the cases, this is the volume, the size, that have been distributed. The question is, if you are not on a reviewing, now let me just ask this, do all board members want all copies of these conveyed to them? Mark is saying no. I mean, and I'll go with kind of like a, I see another shaking of the head. Okay, okay.
I'll just stick to the ones that I'm assigned.
Just to the one that you're assigned?
Just the ones assigned.
Okay, all right. That's fine. I just hope that when the reviewing teams come back, for the members who are not on that reviewing team, you put a lot of trust in what your reviewing team is sharing with you, and we not go through a process of interrogating our board members on what their decision is.
I'm gonna go ahead and object to that. that. I'd like to actually, I mean, even if I'm not going to be reading them, I'd like to still be able to have access to them so that I can read about those other cases. I did say
I mean, if you are a board member
Yeah.
who wants all of these, let that preference be known now. And I think there's one of the folks who are here, and we'll make sure that he gets them. Okay? The December meeting, we've already talked about the agenda. Time is okay. And we really don't have time for a Community Engagement Committee update today. Did you have anything pressing?
We're working on a lot of stuff. We're going to commission meetings at night. We went to one this week. Mr. Gambit went to one, and we have another one set up.
And Bethany's doing a good job of getting those dates.
She is.
Dates and places out. So
Yes.
if that's all there is. Motion to adjourn? Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.
So do you need those now?